The following morning, Gustav himself brought my breakfast, and even sat on the bed after placing the tray on the table. "You were hurt last night, I could see that. We men cannot be trusted not to break the hearts of beautiful women." I tried to be nonchalant, let him think that I hadn't been devastated by Alexis' claims that I meant nothing to him. But Gustav could see through my protestations. "He even had me fooled, you know. I thought he was in love with you. That's why I had you captured and brought here. I thought it would keep him loyal to us. Now I'm left with a dilemma." I looked inquiringly at him. Was I now a dilemma for him? "You can always let me go," I said, hopefully. He gave me a rueful smile. "I'm afraid I can't do that. Not yet, at any rate. You see my face and the faces of my men. If I thought that you and Alexis were in love, I might take a chance and hope you would keep quiet because of his involvement. But now I know you hate him, you would have no hesitation at turning us all in to the police, I'm sure. If I was a cruel and unfeeling man, I would simply kill you to keep you quiet. But your good fortune is I'm not that man. I like you, Sabine. You're an interesting and beautiful woman. You see my dilemma?" My mind was racing fast as well as my heart. I was of no real use to them now. I had to retain Gustav's sympathy. I also desperately wanted to talk to Alexis now that my anger had died somewhat. I needed to understand how I was so hopelessly wrong where he was concerned. "Is Alexis still here? I'd like to talk to him." "No, he left last night. He needs to keep his distance from us to avoid suspicion." I had so many questions to which I needed answers. "Did you start the fire in the hotel?" "No, that was the Italians. They probably guessed that Alexis was helping us. It was their way of punishing him." "But all those innocent people, some of them could have died." "As I said, Sabine, I'm not a cruel man. I would never have done that. But some men are truly evil. You're probably better staying here than returning to Alexis." I was annoyed. "You think I would go rushing back to him after what he said last night? I don't care if I never see him again. I just want to leave here and leave this town. I never want to come here again. If you let me leave, you have no concern about me talking to the police." I wasn't sure if that statement was true, but I needed to convince the Russians that I was no threat to them. Gustav gave a rueful smile and stroked my hand. "I wish it were that simple. I'm afraid you must stay here for the time being, Sabine. When our operations are completed, I may be able to consider that. Or perhaps you might consider returning to Moscow with me. We'll see." I said nothing, but there was no way I was going back to Russia with this man. I had no ambition to become a gangster's kept woman. Gustav stood up. "You'll find that I'm a fair man, Sabine. I'll treat you well. But don't make the mistake of thinking you can double-cross me. You'll find me very unforgiving if you do. I'll make sure you have some more clothes to wear. Is there anything else you want? Just tell Andre. He has my permission to provide you with what you need." Then he was gone, leaving me still with unanswered questions and confusion. How had my life come to this? I have to admit that it hadn't always run smoothly in the past, with my first disastrous marriage, then an unhappy affair with Charles, and falling in love with a young Englishwoman. But I thought I'd found the right man in Alexis, and that my life was set fair from now on. How wrong I was. I just seemed to lurch from one impossible situation to another. As long as I remained on good terms with Gustav, I felt reasonably safe. That wouldn't stop me trying to find a way to escape from this place. Gustav was as good as his word, and a suitcase arrived a couple of days later with a selection of clothes, as well as beauty products and other essentials. The only items I had requested were a better selection of books, I had given Andre a list of half a dozen books I would like to read, and 3 of them arrived with the clothes, including Anna Karenina he'd obviously remembered from my retort. Gustav allowed me to use the upstairs bathroom too, so I could have a daily bath instead of using the sink. He still insisted I be locked up in the daytime when the men were busy or were out, but he expected me to spend the evenings upstairs with him for dinner and conversation. He had a record player as well as a good selection of ballads and classical music. That surprised me after he told me he was a man who didn't enjoy cultural pursuits, but perhaps he excluded music from such pursuits. After dinner we would converse. He would sometimes urge me to bring one of my books upstairs to read, while he concentrated on reading documents and writing in a large ledger he kept. Sometimes other men would come to talk to him, which they did in Russian, so I had no idea what they were discussing. During the day, the men frequently disappeared for hours at a time, and I had no idea what they were doing or where they had been. I asked no questions because I had learned that this irritated Gustav, and I preferred to keep him calm and sweet. I had to admit that I was coming to like the enigmatic Russian more and more. There was no doubt he possessed a sexual aura, a mixture of good looks, power, and a physical presence. Under other circumstances, I would be sexually attracted to him for sure. But these weren't ordinary circumstances, and I tried to ignore him when he was watching me with those dark, smouldering eyes. The last thing I wanted to do was fall for my gangster captor. The sexual tension got to me sometimes, and in the privacy of my darkened room I indulged in stroking and massaging myself to rid myself of the frustration I felt. Sex had always been an important part of my life, but right now survival was more important. Nevertheless, I became aware of my body becoming heated and on edge when I saw he was studying me in his intense manner. If I was sexually frustrated, I was sure he was too. Perhaps he went with women on the occasions he was absent from the house. I had no idea. One day, in the late afternoon, I was coming from the bathroom wearing a thin robe they had given me, and with my wet hair wrapped in a towel, and carrying my clothes. In the corridor, Gustav was approaching from the opposite direction. He stopped in front of me. "Ah, good. You finished in the bathroom. I feel sticky from the heat and need to bathe before dinner." I was embarrassingly aware that my thin robe was sticking to me because of the heat and the moisture, and that the front of the robe was gaping a little. I couldn't really do anything about it because of the clothes I was carrying. I could see admiration in Gustav's eyes. I've been around men long enough to know when they are sexually aroused. I lowered my eyes to his groin to look for a suspicious bulge in his pants, and hurriedly raised them again when I realized what I had done. It had been instinctive, and I hoped that Gustav hadn't noticed. But of course he had. The corner of his lips turned up with amusement, and his eyes glinted. "You make a very delectable sight, Sabine, standing just a few meters from my bedroom and clearly naked under that robe." He stopped talking and just stood in front of me. I began to feel uncomfortable. Yet at the same time I was definitely turned on by his magnetism and my own unfulfilled needs. After several seconds he gave a brief laugh. "Well, I had better bathe. I'll see you at dinner. Oh, by the way, wear the red velvet dress tonight." He stood aside to let me pass. I hurried back downstairs to my room and sat on the bed for a moment to regain my composure and stop trembling. There was no doubt about it. I was sexually attracted to my captor, and seemingly him to me. What, if anything, was I going to do about this? I came upstairs half an hour later, dressed in the red velvet dress as requested. It flattered my colouring and fitted my body perfectly. I was amazed that Gustav knew my exact size without even touching me. Oh, he was sitting in the armchair drinking a whiskey when I arrived in the living room. The table was, as usual, laid for two. I noticed, however, that the table had 2 candles, and that the overhead light had been switched off. Was Gustav building up to a seduction scene tonight? He stood on my arrival and watched me walk towards him. The admiration in his eyes was clear to see. "You look magnificent, Sabine. I knew red would suit you. Would you like a glass of wine?" I accepted the glass and sat in the opposite armchair. "Thank you for the new clothes, Gustav." I felt it wise to keep the subjects talked about light and uncontroversial. Unfortunately, Gustav didn't. He went straight for the jugular. "That dress makes me want to fuck you, right here, right now." I gulped down a mouthful of the red wine, unsure how to respond. Eventually, after a couple of seconds of silence, I managed to say, "It's a lovely dress, thank you." Gustav continued, "You know it's there, don't you, Sabine? You feel it too, I know you do. When we met in the corridor outside the bathroom, I wanted to pick you up and take you into my bedroom and fuck you till you couldn't walk. And I believe you wanted it too at that moment. I saw it in your eyes and the way your chest rose and fell with your faster breathing." I was having trouble breathing right then. Words were an impossibility for a moment. He laughed gently, looking deeply into my eyes. "You feel it now, don't you?" "I don't know what made me do it. I can only put it down to instinct." I nodded my head in agreement. Without a pause, Gustav put down the glass he was holding, stood and walked towards me. He paused for a second before reaching out and pulling me to my feet, drawing my body into his and kissing me hard on the lips. I wanted to resist. I tried in my mind to resist, but my body overrode my mind. I kissed him back. Gustav took my hand and led me towards the door, just as Andrei was coming through with the tureen of soup. Gustav barked an instruction at him in Russian. I guessed what he was saying. It was clear what instruction he was giving. We walked past him and along the corridor to Gustav's bedroom. Inside I was a mixture of nerves and excitement and dread. What was I getting into? Where would this lead? But nothing stopped me from the inevitable path. It almost seemed ordained. Greater powers than me were at work in my head, and I felt compelled to accept what was taking place. I was, without doubt, complicit in this. I wasn't being coerced or threatened in any way. We arrived at Gustav's room. Once inside, he shut the door and turned to me, his voice a little hoarse. I could sense the need in his voice. "This is the only time I will ask you, yes or no." My answer was simple. Yes.